Hey, Johnny. Good morning.
Hello, how are we doing? Good afternoon for me.
Yeah, and good evening for you. I appreciate that we both have for you some fun little colored things in the background and got the blues and reds over there.
A little bit of colour. Gotta get the lighting right.
Out of curiosity, is that it's with the two colors, is it all related to Portal or is that just a happy coincidence?
Definitely a happy coincidence.
Okay.
I've no idea what you're talking about.
There's a
So
portal. The portal game has a red and blue portal for like the teleportation and basically the exact same colors as those. So I was wondering if that was like a fun, very obscure nerdy reference.
no, it's a pure coincidence. So I've actually got a few different bottles for it. So if you watch carefully, they change over time. I think I've got a green one and an orange and purple one as well. So they
Okay.
chop and change every now and again.
Oh, cool. I like the bullet style, and I think that was something that probably over half of my friends, at some point, almost everybody I feel growing up either inherits or buys like a lava lamp, just because they're so much fun to stare at, you know?
100%, definitely. So I think one of those actually, I think I pinched one of them from my daughter. One of those belonged to her. So but yeah,
Perfect.
no, they're good. The small ones as well. You can change the bottles on them, so you can flip the colours, and they're actually kid-safe ones as well, so they don't get hot.
Oh,
So they've got a slightly
yeah,
different.
because I remember definitely there was. I think the middle would be fine, but if you took the cap off and touched either the bottom at all, it would be like it could burn you for sure.
Yeah, totally. I think it's a like a different type of wax with a lower melting point, so it doesn't have to
Gotcha.
get as
Okay.
hot for it to be able to melt for you. So
Awesome. But
yeah, brightens up the background a bit.
I digress. I appreciate you for coming on today. I'm definitely excited to talk about paginated reports. I know we've dabbled on the subject of pagination. At least the only other context that I've so far had anything related to this on my channel is the new InfraRiver visual that's coming out as like one alternative to it. But I mean, paginated reports in its current iteration in Power BI, is essentially a reskinned version of something that's been around for I think almost a couple decades now with Microsoft. Starting back in
Yeah,
SSRS.
yeah, getting there. So I've actually got a slide a little later on, which is the history of paginated reports. I
Oh,
can
perfect.
run you through all of that. I nerded out a little bit this week doing the research for that. So I think I've been using them for 6 or 7 years. But yeah, they go way back.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a resurgence as well, I'm sure we'll talk about. But for people tuning in, like I ended up coming across Johnny's content a while back just online, and I saw some of the blogs that he was doing, and like, oh wait, he's actually doing like multi-part series and paginated reports. I know like I can count on less than one hand like the number of people I know who do anything with the paginated reports. Like it's very useful. I built them, but as soon as people start getting into really complicated things, like it's above my skill level. It's like I know it's kind of like VBA, just enough VBA to get by, but I wouldn't call myself an expert in VBA. And so I thought that was an opportunity. Like, hey, I need some content on here, and I would love to bring on somebody who knows more than me to actually discuss these because they are a very important and useful part of the premium ecosystem now in Power BI. And I really liked how well your videos are written and some of the our blogs were written and some of the videos and everything. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to bring you on. So I'm happy you just decided to come on. But for people tuning in who are less familiar with you, do you want to give a little background and I can switch over to your screen that I see you sharing now.
Yeah, totally, no worries. So yeah, for people that don't know me, my day job is working as a data analytics consultant for a consultancy over here in the UK called Waterstones. So Waterstones are a business and IT consultancy, head offices in the UK in Durham, but we've got offices over in Australia as well. It's not just an analytics consultancy, so for the most part, it's managed services and software development, but we've got a growing data analytics practice as well. Um, Background wise, I've been working with business intelligence software since 2007. Um, I I've written a few of these bios, and I know that it's since 2007 because somewhere in my house, I've got a certificate for a 2 day course I attended on crystal reports. So crystal reports is where I cut my teeth, which believe sort of SSRS and paginated reports was kind of brought out to sort of compete with that from a Microsoft perspective. I think sort of back in the day, crystal reports was kind of the product that was most popular. So that's kind of where I cut my teeth as a report analyst, really. And then as my career developed, I kind of got more into sort of the back end stuff and getting into data warehousing, ETL. And the last 5 years or so has been focused mainly on Microsoft technologies. So yeah, that includes doing a lot of report writing using reporting services, and of course getting involved with Power BI. So I guess that's kind of me professionally. Um, Earlier this year, and I guess where people might know me from, as I launched my own website, Grayskull Analytics. Yes, absolutely, it's a He-Man reference. It was definitely a by the power of Grayskull. Oh, that ties in
Yes.
nicely with Power BI. Um,
They just came out with a new
so
show too.
yeah, so I've not watched They came out with two, I think, didn't they? So there's like the one that Kevin Smith directed on Netflix, and
I've actually
then
watched a few just because I love Kevin Smith, and I just as a quick side note, it's pretty entertaining. It definitely is written for adults, so
yeah, definitely. So I think they're bringing out a kid-friendly one. Like if in the last week or so, there's like a second He-Man series on Netflix. Nothing to do with the plot of the Kevin Smith one.
that's
But
fun.
yeah, and I guess for Grayskull, it's just for a bit of fun. So like I've had a few people approach me to sort of say, oh, will you do some freelance work for me? And it's like it's not really a business. It's just literally it's a website with a blog. I'm pretty active on Twitter. I've got some videos on YouTube. It's just me to have a bit of a digital presence and a bit of an online persona related to the work that I do with Power BI because I'm a big data geek and I really enjoy it. So I just wanted something to sort of extend out to a hobby to do that. So yeah, that's me really. So I've got a couple more slides I can take us through if you like.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
here, here we are, the Paginated Reports history. So first released in 2004 as an add-on for SQL Server 2000. So what's that? 17 years it's been out now, and it's had some subsequent releases in 2005. 2010 was as part of SQL Server 2008 R2, and then the releases got a bit more frequent. So 2012 and 2014, and then for the reporting services enthusiasts out there, sort of 2016 saw a bit of a step change. I guess by 2016, Power BI was sort of generally available as well, and so reporting services got a bit of a facelift to make it a little bit more modern. Because if you look at the old school version of it, it was just very, very dated. Wasn't the prettiest product to work with by any stretch of the imagination. Then the most recent release was 2017. So in 2018, Paginated Reports in Power BI was put into preview. If you look at the release notes for that original preview, it was very limited in terms of the data sources it could connect to. So you could connect it to relational databases effectively, and that was pretty much it. But by the time it got to general availability, that extended that, so you could connect it to, for example, Power BI datasets as well. But one thing to note, and this is one of my favorite memes, got all new features in Power BI, and then it's only premium. So I think the ceiling for premium usage originally, you were looking at $5,000 a month for premium capacity starting, which basically outpriced all but the largest of enterprises. And so, I mean, I've not got any official stats on it, but certainly sort of, talking to other people, I guess adoption of paginated reports in Power BI early doors was maybe a bit limited. And then, of course, April this year, we came with the release of premium per user in Power BI, which all of a sudden made it much more affordable. Certainly, the demo I'm going to be doing today is because I've purchased a PPU license for my own use, and without that, there is no way I would be forking out the $5,000 to be able to demonstrate it from a premium capacity perspective. So it kind of feels like this year there's been a real resurgence for it. People all of a sudden, hang on a minute, now that we can afford this capability, people want to learn more. So yeah, it's been strange for me, as I say, coming from an enterprise perspective and using the on-premise version of this in SQL Server reporting services. I've kind of had to relearn quite a lot and revisit it because it's stuff that I've not done for a couple of years. But all of a sudden, it seems to be a skill set that's in demand.
Exactly.
Um, so these are the kind of points I'm going to cover today, really. So I'm going to show you how to connect to a data set. So there is some great paginated report content out there already. So if people really want to go deep on this and really learn it in depth, you've got Microsoft's YouTube page has got a paginated reports in a day course, which is really good. Laura Graham Brown, I think her YouTube channel is Hatful of Data. She's done a really good series on it too. But one of the common themes was that a lot of those materials are showing you how to connect to a relational database and use the report builder as opposed to actually connecting to a Power BI data set. So I'd be interested to get people's opinions on what's the right thing to do from that perspective, because definitely I've sort of spoken with some people who sort of really believe that the Power BI data set is really all about doing that sort of high level analysis and showing the aggregations and the summaries. And that if you want to do a paginated report, which tend to be a lot lower level granularity, tends to be a bit more transactional, then rather than querying the Power BI data set, you should almost bypass it and go to your source data or a data warehouse, something like that. And then the flip side of that argument is that if you've put all of your business logic into your Power BI data set, so if your DAX queries are covering business rules that create your calculations, and you're already using your Power BI data as that kind of single source of truth, then if you were to bypass that, you're going to have to put a lot of time and effort into recreating that business logic. So what's your opinion, Reid? What do you think from that perspective?
I mean, in general, and the people were kind of pointing to like whether or not certain data sources were limited. I'm of the model of a golden data set whenever possible. Having the promoted and certified data sets now available in Power BI, but that's where the most diversity and customization can be done anyway for data. Keeping all the models into there, having the single source of truth, and then just connecting the reports to that, and at that point building them off of there, because you reduce data siloing and shifting the complexity around where the data is being kept. You minimize the number of unique locations for it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's the classic consultant response. It's going to be an it depends. It's going to depend on the nature of the paginated report you want to be able to produce. It's going to depend on the size of your Power BI
Yep.
data set and the granularity and all that. If you're already trying to reduce your data volume in your Power BI data set by having it aggregated, pre-aggregated, for example, and then you need the detail behind it, I guess you would have to go to source. But
That actually,
yeah,
that's a good point because I mean the goal with a lot of tabular models is obviously you should, as I like to say, not a single extra column or row should be imported into your model that is not needed. So like if you have a 50 million row fact table, but you're only displaying data that essentially is aggregated up to like 500,000 rows, you probably want to pre-process it in a view or in Power Query to reduce the granularity and summarize before pulling it in. But with a paginated report that usually needs like typically row level data or unique ID information kind of printed, I would imagine something like aggregation groups would come into play where you would have those to allow the Power BI model to run more effectively, but you could still have the larger, kind of raw tables, so to speak, or at least ID level detail in the model to service the paginated reports, with the other tables still servicing the visualizations and stuff that would be housed in the Power BI data set.
Yeah, so I think it's probably an example where there isn't necessarily a black and white answer. It sort of depends on the use case, depends on the size of the model and what information needs to be
It depends.
in it.
I just like to phrase it to say it depends means I don't have enough information yet.
Yeah, no,
I can't provide a educated answer until I gather more information. So let's discuss this further.
yeah, totally. So I guess without further, well, hang on, I've not gone through my bullet points. So yeah, these are the sort of things I'm going to go through. How to connect to the data set in the first place. Creating a simple DAX query because we're going to use the Power BI data set. How to add a parameter to the report, how to add date parameters because it does have some slight nuance to it. And then a couple of other sort of key points here really in terms of the formatting once you've got the data into your paginated report, how to deal with totals, the joy of page sizes. I don't know if there are guys on the live stream who have suffered the pain of getting the page size wrong in a paginated report, but it's something to look out for. The fact that headers are weird, so we'll get to that in time, and yeah, also the fact that we've now, of course, got the paginated report visual, so you can mash up the contents of a paginated report into an actual Power BI report as well. So if we've got enough time, we'll get onto that at the end as well. So without further ado, let's crack on in there. So this is the Power BI report builder. You've got a couple of different ways to download it these days. So Microsoft have now made it available in the App Store. So if you've got App Store access, you can grab it from there. Or alternatively, there is a MSI file you can download from the Power BI website and download it that way instead. This is what it looks like when you open it up. So I guess the first thing you're going to do is connect to the data. There's different approaches to this, to be fair. So I know some people who advocate for setting up your page properties before you start jumping in with the data, but that's no fun. It's much more fun to just crack on in there. So first thing I want to sort of demonstrate is how you connect to a Power BI data set. Again, earlier this year, Microsoft actually updated Report Builder with a few new features, and one of those features is now having this data ribbon at the top, which gives you kind of a bit more of a Power BI experience, makes it quicker and easier to actually do that. As you can see, there are various data sets that you can connect to, and you've even now got the enter data option there as well, which is I haven't personally used, but I can see some nice use cases for that. But the one, of course, that we're interested in is this Power BI data set. So if we click on there, this will connect to the Power BI service, and we'll be able to see all the workspaces that I've got access to. And of course, the little icon showing it's a premium capacity workspace. So if I select my data model workspace, and I've got a Contoso data resale set here. So let's select that. This will take us to a wizard for actually creating the data set. So you've got a couple of choices. And again, this is a new feature as part of the recent release. If you are comfortable writing DAX from scratch, you can literally stick a DAX query in this text box here. If you're less comfortable with writing DAX, or also because there are various other features that this will work better with, what I would absolutely recommend is using the Query Designer button down here. So click on the Query Designer. And what you'll get here is almost an experience that I think is a bit like working in Power BI, or if you've used the query builder that's in DAX Studio, you literally get a pane over here that's going to show you all the tables that are available for you in your data model. And then basically this pane here, which gives you the nice instruction, drag your measures here to add to the query. Now, this Query Designer is kind of a hangover of the kind of legacy reporting services tech, because really it was designed with SSAS multi-dimensional models in mind, which for on-premise analysis services was the sort of original implementation. I think it was 2012 onwards that you could start having tabular models as an alternative. But kind of one of the sort of features of that is you get some strange terminology going on, I guess. So you don't really have KPIs in tabular models. I think you can implement them, but it's not sort of, it's a bit of a clunky implementation to do it. You'll see things like dimension and hierarchy, which are really terminology that's sort of part of the sort of multi-dimensional estate, really. But if you kind of ignore that, this is pretty simple to use. So I'm going to build a really, really simple query for this Contoso data set. So I'm going to do by continent, and you can literally drag it in. Store name, drag that across, and then I got my measures up here. I'm a measures table guy. I don't know, you pro measure table or anti measure table? It's a hot topic by all accounts.
I'd say I'd say there's more people for than against it. The only reason, and I probably should know this, but um, at one point Q&A did not work with the measures table. It could not call upon a table with data. It could not call upon a measure in one table grabbing data from another or something like that. And but that was years ago. And honestly, I really don't have any customers that use Q&A, so it's not been something I've kept track of. But that's the only downside that I remember
Yeah.
Marco mentioning to me long time ago. Otherwise, it is, especially now with golden data sets, it's I think even more and more important because it's so easy to have them sectioned. Like at a minimum, what I'd like Matt Allington, what he does is he puts a folder in each table with columns and measures per table, but I still just prefer a measures table sitting at the top of the list with a bunch of folders that just tell it, which tables those measures come from.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. And I believe they did fix the Q&A issue.
And there you go.
I think there's a couple of other there's a couple of other issues. I think there's and I've not seen this. I've only sort of heard it anecdotally, but it doesn't work so well with composite models either, apparently. But I'm not a big composite model user either, so I've not come across that. Anyway, right. So I'm going to pull in, make this really, really simple and high level this report. So I'm going to bring in sales revenue. I'm going to bring in my cost, and I'm going to bring in my margin percentage. And if you want to, you can preview what that query looks like. We can see that we're connecting to our model and we're getting our data back. So if I hit OK on that, what you'll see is this query window here will automatically write us a nice little DAX statement. So pretty simple summarize column statement. So hit OK on there. What you'll then see on the left-hand side is we've got this little datasets folder, which has now got was previously empty. We've now got a dataset in there. And then what we can do is add a table onto our report. So I don't tend to use the wizard, so I just tend to insert it in there. And we can literally drag and drop onto our table. And then if we use this run button in the top left-hand side, we're up and running with our first paginated report. Beautiful. So pretty quick and simple to get going. Now, in that example, I'm literally querying the entire data model. I haven't sort of introduced any kind of filter to bring that down. So this Contoso retail data set, it's got about 16 million rows in the fact table, and I've just literally hit all of that in one big bang. And I think every paginated report I've ever written, and in fact every Power BI report I've ever written, your end users are going to want to be able to filter that data down somehow and get a smaller subset. So if I come back to my data set, I've got a couple of options here. I can go to my dataset properties, or I can go straight to this query option just here. And that query option will just take me straight into my query designer. And if I want to add a filter, then it's this pane at the top where we have got dimension hierarchy and operator here. So let's say I just want to see European sales because I'm in Europe. So if I pick my store dimension, and hierarchy refers to the field. So let's get continent name equal to, and I'm going to say Europe. So if I hit OK on that and run that, you can now see I've filtered it and I'm just getting results for Europe. Perfect. So that's how you can apply filters. But again, from an end user experience, that's a hard-coded filter. It's not going to give your users the option to pick and choose what they see. It's almost like in a Power BI report, if you've pulled something into the filter pane but then hidden the filter pane, it's not going to be adjustable. So what we can do is we can parameterize that filter and give our users the opportunity to manipulate it. So to do that, I'm going to go into dataset properties here and the query designer. So I'm going to get rid of that option to start with. Just remove that hard-coded one. And then here on the right-hand side, there is this little tick box for parameters. So again, the rendering is really, really annoying because by default, it kind of cuts off the edge of that pane and it's not entirely clear what it is. Sometimes when you render it, I've even seen it being completely hidden, so you just might have to expand the size of the window. But literally, if we click on that parameter and hit OK, and I'll hit OK again. Now when I run it, it's going to prompt me which continent name do I want to see. So I can see Europe for one. I can select more than one, so let's go for Europe and North America. And you can now see we're getting results for Europe and North America. So that was pretty straightforward. There's a few things that happen in the background when you do that. So first thing that I want to show you is that in the left-hand side, in this report data pane, we've now got a new entry, parameters. And so by adding that parameter using the query designer, as soon as we pulled an option into and we tick that parameters box, it's auto-generated, this parameter. If you were to hand type the DAX and not use the query designer, then that wouldn't appear by default. It's something you have to create yourself. So that's kind of one plus point to using the query designer instead. And if we look at the properties behind this, there's a few things that we'll see. So first of all, we've got this available values option. And we'll see that what this is actually doing is it's going to a data set that's called store continent name to populate what parameter values are actually available, which feels a little bit strange because on the left-hand side in data sets, there definitely isn't a store continent name data set there. And that's because, and I have no idea why they've done it this way, you have this show hidden datasets option. So what's actually happened is that by clicking that parameter option, it's created this DAX query to actually populate that, that parameter for you. So we're now hitting our dataset twice. One wants to get the parameter values, and then once the parameter values have actually been fed through to our main query, that's the second time they'll hit the report server. So that's the first thing it'll do. It'll create this sort of second DAX query in the background to make sure that it gives you that list of parameter values for you. The other thing that it does, and I don't know if anyone spotted it when this was loading before, is the actual DAX in the background has been changed as well. And we've now got this function in here, RS custom DAX filter. Okay, so that's been automatically generated by the query designer. Now, the interesting thing with that is if I go to DAX Studio.
People are really happy about that you mentioned the hidden data set section.
Yeah, it's strange. So again, I'm so used to, from my old school development days, just creating that data set myself. And kind of it's a nice feature that it auto generates it, but I just don't understand why Microsoft decided that the implementation should hide it from you when it automatically generates it.
Agreed.
But yeah, it's there, so that's what that does. So this is the DAX that's now been generated from the query designer. Had to format it because if it's not formatted, it's not really DAX. So if I connect it to my data set, if I try and run this, it's going to ask for it's not going to work, so connection's timed out for starters. So hang on, let's go to this. That's me setting up my connection far too eagerly before the stream started. Right, if I try and run this now and give it a parameter, I don't know if people are familiar with the fact that you can use parameters inside DAX Studio, but you can parameterize a DAX query. So if I tell this to go and get the European data, it fails, and it fails with this error message that basically says that RS custom DAX filter is not a valid variable or function name. So even though the query designer has generated this DAX, that's not a real DAX function. So what's interesting to do here is if I open up a new connection on the same data set, and put my query trace on. If I go back to my paginated report, run that one more time. What you should see in the old queries. First of all, this query here is the query that I talked about that's actually just generating the, oh, wrong one. Right, well, this is the query that's been running. So effectively, the piece of code that's here for RS custom DAX filter, when that DAX query generates against your data set, the query, the report builder actually passes it as a different piece of DAX, and it converts that RS custom DAX filter to this filter statement here instead. So it's basically translates this RS custom DAX filter to a different piece of DAX that passes this filter. So it's saying that we obviously want to filter our continent name by Europe and North America. So again, it's just kind of if you're looking at the DAX that the query design is generating, you just have to be wary that it's kind of almost pseudo DAX, that actually when it gets passed down to your data set might get translated as something else. And that effectively is there to allow the passing of multiple parameters to one filter. So again, just something to be wary of. So we've got a good continent name filter in there, but pretty much every report I've ever written, again, always needs to be filtered by a date range. I think this data set is covering around about 3 years worth of data, and pretty much every requirement I've ever worked on has been kind of, I want to see my sales for yesterday or the last week or month to date so far. So I'm going to make some changes to my data set.
Adam Saxon says hello, by the way. He popped in, wanted to give a big thumbs up on people advocating for paginated reports and popping off to another meeting.
Good times. Hello, Adam, but he's gone, so. Right, okay. So let's add into this a date field as well. And I'm going to stick my date up here in my filters too. One thing that pretty much I always do with a date filter, so you can actually change the operator. So for continent name, we want it to equal what our parameter is, but you can actually set ranges. You can, well, not just ranges, you can do all these different operators, but for a date range, I'll normally choose range inclusive. And again, what that'll do is give us now 2 checkboxes over here. So that's because we're doing a range, we want to be able to set the lower range and the upper range. So I'm going to double click that. And the DAX that it generates is just bonkers. I love DAX, and I consider myself to be quite good at it, and I have still not entirely worked out what that's doing, other than the fact that it is calculating variables to pass down to my query for which dates are coming from my parameters. So hit OK there and run this again. Okie doke. So first thing it does is it has this error message around the doesn't like the default values of the parameters. Now, what causes that is the fact that my DAX is expecting me to pass a string to it, but it is my parameters defined as a date time. So if I change that to text, and oh no, don't delete it, I definitely need it. Change that to text as well, and fingers crossed, this should work now. So let's give you some zoom. So we've got continent name Europe, and then from date, let's do month to date. So scroll down this big long list. Ooh. And then get a to date. So what are we on today? The 9th. Okay. And that's a terrible user experience. Why is that not just a date picker?
Right.
Because the DAX query is expecting us to pass it a string, and the parameter just renders as a big, long, horrible list that's really, really difficult to navigate. So it works. I hope it works. There we go. So we can see we've got European sales. I didn't pull my date onto it, but I'll guarantee you that's definitely for the right dates. I promise you. So is there a better way we can do that? Is there something we can do so that becomes a date picker instead of text? And this is kind of, I don't know whether this falls into the category of bug or feature in terms of why it is expecting the text, but there is a way to get around it. So I'm going to go into my parameter properties here. I'm going to change that to be date time again. If I change it to date time, it's clever enough to render it as a date picker. And because it's a date picker, we don't need to use these available values anymore. So I can switch that off and switch that off, and then do the same on my 2. And because we're going to use the date picker, we can get rid of that query, and we can get rid of that query. And then the last thing we need to do now is on our dataset properties. You'll see that there's a parameters option in the dataset properties, and what this does is maps your parameters to your DAX query. So if I come in here and I go to my from date, all I'm going to do is wrap this in a function that's going to convert the date from my date picker to the text value that my DAX query is now expecting. So that's changed to text. Let's do it here as well. And fingers crossed I've got the syntax right for it. Oh, what have I done wrong? The joys of live demos. So oh, there we go, missed a bracket. Here we go. So and I've got a nice date picker. By default, it always defaults to the current date as well. So I don't have to scroll through the calendar from the dawn of time. I can literally jump straight to September. And because I've now remembered to put my date onto my table, you can see that's all of September's data. So the other thing that's kind of nice from a report builder perspective, and kind of, I don't know if this is a requirement that you see often in the work that you do, but quite often in Power BI reports, people want a report to default to a specific time period. And
Yep,
although you've got the
relative dates. Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So the relative date is great, but then if people then want to change what dates it does instead and have a bit more flexibility, I see people that are like, oh, well, can it not just give me a date range, but always default to the date range that I want? And I think one of the reasons that it seems to be sort of quite a popular sort of feature request is because in paginated reports, you can absolutely do it. It's really, really simple to do. So again, if I go into my parameter properties for my from parameter and go to my default value, I can add a default here as an expression. So if I want my from date to be the first of the month, then what I can do, and I'm blatantly copying and pasting this from a text file I've got open on my other screen.
But that's the way to do it in
Yeah, you
demo. It's
can
like, hey, I'm not going to type this for you, but how about I'm going to paste it and then I'm going to
100%.
walk you through what I've written.
Yeah, exactly. So this is just basically sort of saying, for today, get me the year. For today, get me the month, and then append a one onto it. So it's going to give me the first of the month. I can do the same for my due date. Default value, specify the value. And I don't mind typing this one out because it's loads easier. It's literally today's date. And then for completeness, whilst I'm at it, I'm going to add some defaults on this as well. So I'm just going to literally put and by adding these default values, it just makes, again, for me, the user experience just a little bit slicker, because when you run the report, it's going to give you an output straight away without you having to set the parameters. And then obviously once that's rendered, you can still go back and change it after the event. It's no, if we want to exclude Asia, or if we want to go to the beginning of the year, for argument's sake, you can still change it and rerun the report if I pick the right button. But yeah, you can change it after the event being the point. So at this point, we have generated quite a basic data set with the query designer. We've then been able to parameterize that so that our end users can kind of manipulate what the output of that needs to be. And it feels like we're well on the way to sort of producing that paginated report. But then you start getting into the nuance of paginated reports and some of the horribleness. So I know that in my Power BI data set, I've taken the time to make sure that I've properly formatted all of my fields and all of my measures. So in my data set, I'm showing dates, not date times. I have my revenue nicely formatted as a currency, same with my costs, and my sales margin should be represented as a percentage. And unfortunately, that formatting doesn't propagate when you query that data set using Report Builder. You have to basically reset your formatting. So there's some different places that you can do it. You can, in your table, right-click, go to your text box properties, choose your number, and then decide what format you want. I am a fan of this data format because it makes sense to everybody. Again, I think that's another hotly contested topic, isn't it? Date formats for analytics. Do you do year, month, or day, month, or month, day?
Right.
Very regionalized. So
Well, yeah, exactly. Depends on, Europe versus the US and a lot of other stuff. At one point I remember hearing about this because mentally it seems to make sense you go smallest to largest, day, month, year, instead of month, day, year. But I should probably know this, but like some database developer told me at some point that from a coding perspective, it's more optimal somehow in terms of the structure and the hierarchies when you do month, day, year, or something like that. It somehow is easier to be able to write and fetch data from that from an architecture perspective. So I can't remember
wow,
exactly why. I just remember hearing that at one point. So it's actually harder to parse out dates in day, month, year, or something like that.
that's an interesting one. I've not heard that before. I know that we came across in one of my sort of previous roles, we came across an issue where even though in Power BI and you've got a table, you can change the sort order. If you're using Analyze in Excel, it's still expected to sort things alphabetically, and so we got some crazy behaviors in terms of date formats. And you try to order something by date, it would get it wrong. Whereas if we used sort of year, month, day format, it worked everywhere. So I've kind of like always adopted that since. Right, so for formatting, you can right-click and use the text box properties. You can click here and go up into the ribbon and use this up here. So I want my revenue to be a currency with no decimal places, and I want the comma in there as well. And then the other place you can do that is here on the left-hand side in the properties pane. So if I copy and paste that and then go to my sales cost and come down to my format in the bottom right. I can do it there as well. So you've got 3 different options for where you add your formatting. I guess if you right click in and using the properties dialog, you can only do 1 cell at a time. If you are using either the properties pane here, or if you're using the ribbon at the top, you can actually multi-select and apply the same formatting across multiple fields, which is good. Set this on to percentage and just stick that to 1 decimal place. So fingers crossed again if I run this. There we go. So now our data is beautiful again and shows up in the formats that we're expecting. Apologies for the pound sterling for those watching overseas, but I went with my local currency. Cool. So again, we're getting there in terms of how we want this to look and feel. So another nice feature you can do is to add totals to this. So again, kind of, if you're doing like a matrix or a table in Power BI, by default, you'll tend to get a ground total. You don't get that by default in a paginated report, but it's simply a case of highlighting the fields that you want to summarize and add total, and it will automatically add this row for you, and you can see it's going to sum my sales and my cost. And if we run that, it will, on the final page, if I go to my last page, so we've got a total, so we can see our total revenue, our total cost. And this margin percentage makes absolutely no sense. What's that, 133,000%? That's absolutely nonsensical. So it's another trap that you need to fall into. You need to be wary of, I guess. If you've spent so much time in Power BI and you've watched all the SQL BI YouTube videos and you've read the definitive guide to DAX, and your brain is now working in row context and filter context. Once you've returned your data set into your paginated report, it doesn't have the concept of a row context. So it's not going to, for this margin expression, it's not going to realize that I no longer have a constant and store name and calendar date context, and therefore it's going to give me the overall result. It's just literally going to sum up the column as if we were in something like Excel. So if you've got, I guess from a traditional BI background, we'd call them a non-additive measure. You just have to be wary that when you present totals or subtotals in a paginated report, by default, that is not going to give you the expected result. So you can alter it. Again, if I right click on this and go to my expression, so to calculate my margin, it's going to be the sum of my revenue minus the sum of my costs, then divided that by my revenue. Again, Blue Peter style, I've already got it on here. Is Blue Peter a thing for you in the States? Have you heard of Blue Peter? Is that just a UK thing?
It sounds familiar, but it's not like quite ringing a bell.
It was like a kids TV show where they used to do like arts and crafts and things like that. And
That's cool.
like one of the catchphrases was, "Here's one I made earlier." So rather than actually take you through every single step, it would be, "Oh, here's one I made earlier. This is what it should look like at the end."
It just makes me think of Bob Ross for adults.
Bob Ross, blimey.
Now that he's on Netflix, honestly, I've had him in the background a couple of times when I'm working. It's just this nice, very relaxing voice, just talking about happy little trees, as you go about your day.
Awesome. I can imagine falling asleep to Bob Ross though, which is not to say he's boring. It's just like say he's kind of got like
it's a very
tone, hasn't it?
It's a very soothing, almost like meditative voice. It's just one of those that like it feels like a hug. I do actually have a question from Kendall about that. We were on daytime a little bit because there's always so many questions about that. Or not EditQ. One sec. Let me pop it on the screen. There we go. Is there a way to identify where users are located in the region for their current date time? So, but able to kind of have that change dynamically.
So for the current date time, it's really annoying because it's going to just take the date time from the server you're on. So you can see here, this is the time on my my laptop. So this is my local
Mhm.
UK time at the minute. If I publish this up to the Power BI service, which I will
Yep.
do, my the time on my Power BI tenant is GMT. So
Mhm.
we're British summertime at the minute, but my tenant's Greenwich Mean Time, and it will basically just offset it by an hour. So for this like execution time at the bottom, there's no way you can change that. What you can do from a display perspective, from a region perspective, is you can set the region of a report. So I have to try and remember where this is. Here we go. From a localization perspective, you can actually change the localization. So if you want to, from a formatting perspective, you can certainly choose other regions. So obviously we were sort of joking before about sort of in the UK we tend to do day, month, year, and in the States it's often month, day, year. So if you wanted to change the language setting to be English US, then it'd sort of respect that when you publish the report. And the Germans have like, so I worked in a
Ooh.
company where we had offices in the UK and in Germany, and the German formatting was crazy. For they like to use they switch their decimal places and their commas. So you have they use the decimal place is represented by a comma, and the commas are represented by the decimal places. So you can get into sort of things like that. So you can set the language of a report and kind of have it hard coded. Otherwise, it should respect whatever the language setting of the target server is.
Okay, so it will
Yeah,
do a
from
little bit of localization. On that, there was actually a great question as well on Sergey. Is it possible to change the currency symbol dynamically?
not as far as I'm aware, unless you were gonna. I mean, I was
The
gonna
only
sort of talk
part
about
part
sort of
of
using
yeah,
because
I was just gonna say part
there's
of
a
it
method of
probably comes
calculation
from
groups.
yeah. Well, I was gonna say part of it probably comes from what you're identifying because because what is identifiable that would change because at that point you could write a measure of something else that could maybe format it and then change the symbol, but you'd probably have to have a text output to have the symbol change based off of some condition being met, right?
Yeah, and then things like your subtotals wouldn't work. So
Yeah.
I'll have to have a go. It's like I think the way forward with that. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I want to say no. I think even with that calculation group like technique that you can use in Power BI, presumably it still would just forget the formatting once you get it into a paginated report anyway. Um, I'd have to experiment. I don't know.
No, it's a good question, but I feel like that's one of those where, well, in this case, obviously it depends because we don't know one what we're identifying to do the switch, but then another question I could think of follow up with that is it would be nice if it wasn't if it was not just the sign. So I'm also thinking if you can do a currency conversion, that I think should be possible because at that point you just have a number that needs to be multiplied up or down, like US to the EU like times 1 point whatever, so that the number could change and be accurately displaying whatever the local currency is, but I don't think you could change the symbol next to it. But the number should, I would imagine, should be something that you could at least adjust based off if you have a table that has current currency rates that's refreshed, and then the DAX just calculates against that, depending.
Yeah, and going back to the role that I did where we had those UK and Germany offices, that's exactly what we implemented. So um, they had a table where they could choose to see either local currency or switch between euros and sterling. And we even hard coded the DAX so that if they were trying to see local currency, it wouldn't add together like two different currencies. It would always return a blank sort of say, no, you've got to either look at one country or you've got to specify a conversion if you want to consolidate the two. So
Exactly.
there's definitely ways to achieve it in Power BI, but yeah, in terms of doing it in a paginated report, off the
There's
top
a
of my
good
head, I
suggestion,
couldn't.
making it a selectable parameter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess the like trouble with that would be that could you select the parameters to say, well, I guess if the parameter was doing the currency conversion, that would definitely work. But if you were just having the parameter to change the symbol, then it would be might be misleading, I guess, really, because if your revenue was actually in dollars, but you just change the parameters to say it was pounds, then yeah,
Out of
cool.
curiosity, as a last thing, can you use calculation groups from a Power BI dataset? Because yeah, Sergey pointed out a good point that yeah, with calculation groups in a regular Power BI report at least, there are ways to do currency conversions with symbols. So I'm not sure how heavily utilized those are in the report builder though, or even if they can be.
Yeah, so they should, in fact, because I've got a calculation group in this data set. If I go to the query designer, so this is a calculation group here, this for time intelligence. And so it's accessible in the report. And if I pull it on and want to select one, so I could do year to date in theory. So they're accessible when you use the query designer, and you could definitely make sure that they get included in your DAX query. But yeah, I'd have to try it out. So I don't have a dynamic formatting calc group in this data set. So whether or not it would respect that and propagate the formatting through to the paginated report, or whether or not it would do what everything else does and just completely forget the formatting, I'm not sure. It'd be so frustrating if you were to implement that as a calc group and then realize that, oh, it doesn't work when you propagate through. So yeah, I'd have to go in and have a look. Cool. Right. I'm at the point where I'm going to talk about the joy of page sizes now, because this is really good fun. So I'm going to run this report. So I think like early on in the live chat, somebody had a question to sort of say, oh, well, when should you use a paginated report? And definitely one of the use cases is for people that want to print reports, because if you can imagine you've got a table of data in Power BI and you try and print it from a Power BI report, it just crops off at the point where the data like starts to scroll in your Power BI report. So if you want to be able to export that and print it in a more printable format, then paginated reports is a great solution for that. And when you're viewing a report, and this is sort of true whether or not you're using Report Builder in design mode, or whether or not you're using the actual Power BI service once you've published it, you can see a print layout. So that shows us there what this is going to look like when we print it. So the whole 135 pages, and we can navigate through. Okay, so that fits on a page okay at the minute, but the store names are a bit squished up, so we might want to grab this and make the column a bit wider just to make it look better effectively. And if I run that now, on my page view, all of a sudden I've lost my margin column. It ends up spilling over onto the next page, and such an easy thing to do without realizing, because again, if you're coming from a Power BI background, that canvas is fixed. It's like you can't accidentally put something on there that's not going to fit on the canvas.
Exactly.
Whereas the print views in paginated reports, you are. Now, one thing, if you look at this, is there's quite a lot of white space around this report at the minute. So you've got all of this here. So to try and give yourself a bit more workable space, there's actually a property. If you go to the report properties on the page setup, you've got margins. So it's actually currently putting a 2 centimeter margin all the way around my report. So definitely I sort of tend to just give myself a little bit more working space and make my margins a bit smaller. So for an A4 piece of paper, I know that that's 210 millimeters wide. If I'm going to have a margin of 1 centimeter, so 10 millimeters, I know that I'm going to have 90 millimeters of working space. So what I can also do is, if I select my page, I could set my page width. So that's a property over on the right hand side here. I can set the page size to 190. And then I can see how much wet space I've got to work with. But for argument's sake, if I decide that this store name column is still not wide enough, and I widen that again with no warning, that
Mhm.
page size isn't fixed, and it will just literally overspill. So when you run it again, you get exactly the same problem. You get missing columns effectively. So I guess it's worthwhile sort of saying this is only really an issue if people want to be able to print the reports. I've heard people sort of talk about creating like invoices using paginated reports, or maybe a pick list from a stock room that someone wants to print off and tick off as they pick the stock. If you know your report needs to be printed, then pay attention to your
Yeah.
page sizes. A lot of the reports that I've done throughout my career, people didn't want to print. It didn't really matter. As long as they could see all the data rendering on a screen, it wasn't an issue. So what I like to do with that page size is set my property so that it's at the size I want it to be, and then create some kind of marker that sort of shows where the edge is. So by default, you get this execution time down here. If I move that to the right, I know that's the edge of my page. And if I accidentally make my page wider, the fact that I've got white space here is like a reminder to sort of say, right, no, you need to make your page smaller again. So just a hint really to help you out with those page sizing. Okay, what else? Headers. Headers are weird. If I run this report again now, and this is true of both the print view here, but also if I go back to the regular layout as well. But here I've got my column headers, content name, store name, calendar date, and if I go to page 2, it's nonsensical. And I guess if you did print that report off, and maybe if there are a few more columns as well, it'd be really, really easy to mix up which column means what. And again, I've never really understood why it's not the default behavior to just repeat those column headers at the top of each page. Now, there's a few different properties in the properties pane that kind of make you think that they would fix it. If I can see one. Can't remember which one it is, but there's one that sounds like it should fix that problem, and it absolutely doesn't. And the way to fix it is just ridiculously hidden. So if we go down to the bottom right of the screen here, and you'll see, like, it's so small that even on zoom it's probably difficult to spot. There's this little chevron, and if you click that and go to advanced mode,
Way down there.
then over here on the row groups, you need to select that, and then there's a property over here on the right, repeat on new page, and set that to true. And that should I get to page 2 now. There we go. I've got my header still. Just the other thing that you might want to do, I guess, is have some title up here. Oops. Again, what that'll do is a title is by default, it will only show on the first page. So it's gone again now. And you might prefer to have that repeated on each page, in which case the way to do that is on the insert ribbon at the top. There is this option to insert a header. So if you click on that, it gives you this area up here. And I like to have everything butted up at the top, no white space. So now we run that. There we go. We've got our title showing on every page as we go. So that might not be what you prefer. You might like the fact it only shows on the first page, but personally, I like to have it at the top of each page as well. So it's a good one to look out for from that perspective. Cool. How are we doing for time? So we've gone 6. Well, I say we've gone 6. We've gone 6 here in the UK.
Yeah.
I
We're
could quick.
I was gonna say we can start wrapping up soon if you have like a module left or anything else to wrap up, and then we can answer a couple of questions that I have as well in the comments and do a little bit of Q&A.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so this is sort of a pretty basic and pretty plain report. There's various other formatting options. So, like personally for me, I like to have any dates and measures. I prefer to be right aligned, so you can do that over here. You can change the alignment, make everything like mid-aligned there. So various can do. I like to have my totals to be bold. I like to have my images to be a shade lighter. So you get some funnel into the actual important data. And I think one of the sort of common things to do is also have those banded, so you get like the nice separation of lines with some shading. So again, you can sort of do things like change what the background color is, which is over here, and you can stick an expression in there. So again, like, just going to stick a background color here, and basically this is saying that if the row number's even, then it's going to have no fill, but if it's not even, it's going to be a shade of gray. And it just various things you can do with the formatting to pretty it up. There we go. So once you're kind of happy with your format, I mean, there's other things you can do. You could add images into your header. I normally put a bit of color in my borders and things like that. But once you're happy with it, you can publish that up to the Power BI service. So I'm going to stick it in this Contoso Retail Reports. It's sales by store. And see if we can get it up. And this is now published up to the service, available to run, default parameters, and there we go. So kind of end to end, whistle stop. That's creating a report from a Power BI data set. Once you've got it in the service, if you want to, I don't know if we've got time to quickly show the paginated report visual very
Yeah,
quickly,
let's
or
do that.
we can. Sweet. Okay, so got because there's some cool tricks you can do with this. So I've got this global sales report that's pointing at the same data set. And if I add another page on this, let's see here, we've got the paginated reports visual. And if we click on that and add that over here, connecting to a report, this is literally the only paginated report I've got published, so that's the one it's going to go for. And then what you can do is, because my paginated report is because my paginated report has got parameters, I can hook those parameters up to my fields in my report here. So in order to do that, you have to pull the fields into the parameters pane here. So I add content name, which will then, I've broken it.
That's the actual error message.
The
It
joys
seems.
of,
There we go. Oh, okay. That actually seems like a Power BI issue. If it's failing to connect to the service.
ooh,
Oh, okay.
there we go.
Who are you logged in as?
Yeah, no, definitely logged in as me for the
Okay.
right tenant. So what you do theoretically is you would, whichever fields you want to map from your data set to your report, you need to pull into this parameters section. And then, and this is strange because it's let me connect to the tenant to select the report. Let's give it one more go. I want to turn off the defaults for starters. Yeah, it's not happy. right? I think the demo gods are not with us. There's quite there's some content out there on how to do this effectively. I think Patrick and Cube has done a video on exactly how this visual works. You select your report. Your report has to be in the same workspace as the paginated report. And then you basically link up the parameters from your paginated report to the fields in your data set. For some things, calendar dates, which are like a from and to date, you do need to create a DAX measure that specifies the current minimum selection and the current maximum selection. So it's really, really simple piece of DAX to get the minimum date and the maximum date. And theoretically it works, but not today, unfortunately. So the cool trick I was going to show is that, and sort of one of the things that I've been doing is I've actually been having these paginated report visuals on a separate page and hiding it. And then you can actually use the drill through functionality. So from this report here, which is not going to connect either because it doesn't think I'm connected. It definitely was. But yeah, theoretically, you can have an interactive report here. So if I filtered on North America and August, then you can right click and the drill through will take you through to the paginated report and pass the parameters through, which is really nifty. But yeah, not today. Maybe another time, or go watch Patrick. Or maybe you could do a video now, Reeve.
Right? Yeah. I'll start dabbling in a little bit of paginated reporting. I do have a couple of questions queued up, so if you're done with this, I can switch over to
go for it.
Yeah, switch over to the main
demo.
screen.
The demo is over. We're killing the demo.
Perfect. Yeah, so I'll just start from the oldest to the newest. A question for later. Is it possible to have both portrait and landscape orientation in one report? So basically giving them a toggle for that.
I don't believe so. So you can absolutely change the page orientation. So you can decide to have it in portrait or landscape, but both on the same report. And actually, I had a customer that had that exact requirement, and the answer was no. Sorry, we can't do it.
I can almost imagine what you would have is essentially like two reports built, having if it's in Power BI, having like a button on the page that's a hyperlink, and it just opens report A or report B, and then at that point you can export either one of those two separately built paginated reports.
Yeah, possibly. So, I mean, we did a management reporting pack for one of our clients recently, and they wanted that management reporting pack to have some pages portrait and some pages to be landscape.
Yeah.
And using Power BI, you could do it. You could have different sized pages on Power BI, and when you exported it to PDF, it was clever enough to then, when it printed it, do the right orientation. But when we looked into doing that, we looked at, could we do the same solution with paginated reports instead? And we couldn't find a way. So if there is a way and somebody knows it, please let me know. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think you can do that.
And I mean, we're always looking out, and I'm sure for you as well, like for new ways to learn stuff from people. And if they have different approaches or new things, like that's one of my favorite things is coming out of a live stream, like, oh, cool, I learned some new stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Let's see. Here's another one. Can we completely customize the parameter models? So, as some examples, using your own background color, have a date time filter, cascading filters.
Oh, interesting. So, I think when I was talking about earlier the various releases, one of the releases in the later versions of the product was a more customizable parameter pane. So I didn't have it switched on because I wasn't really using it. But you can, if you've got this option selected in the view option, you can have the parameters pane enabled. And like in old school SSRS, you could only have 2 columns. So if you had like 5 or 6 parameters, it had to be really, really long. And then they sort of said, actually, we're going to turn that into a table experience so you can rearrange them. So if you wanted to do things like that, you absolutely can. Can you change the properties on it for backgrounds? I don't think you can. I've never tried it. I mean, again, one of the things you might notice is that if you the way that parameters pane renders in the report builder versus when you're actually in the Power BI service is slightly different. Like looks a bit slicker. It's got like a drop shadow, a bit more monochrome here. So I don't think those properties are sort of belong to the report. I think it'll just be like that in the service. And I think even if you customize your theme, so obviously in Power BI service, you can customize the look and feel of the tenant. So I've got like my grey bar and my branding on this. I think even if you change that, I think that will always just be plain and white, as far as I'm aware.
Yep.
Again, though, if someone knows a way, let me know.
All right.
Yeah, I don't think it lets you go as far as doing it. No.
Kind of remove that from queue. There's one other from Mustafa. That is there any kind of like relative date time filtering possible?
Um,
I
Good
guess outside of
question.
setting up your own like custom slicer or table in Power BI that has categorical elements to let you pick relative dates. Because I've done like in time intelligence table connected to my calendar table that has something called like year to date, which selects all of the
Yeah,
rows that would be associated with that.
yeah, totally. I mean, I like I've done all kinds of funky stuff in the past with the parameters. So for instance, there's all sorts of wacky things you can do, like toggle on and off the visibility of a column. So one of the properties you'll have on a table is something like column visibility, and you can decide whether to show it, hide it, or show or hide based on an expression.
Mhm.
And done all kinds of crazy things in the past whereby you'd put an expression in there that says if parameter selected is show margin, then show it, and if the parameter selected is don't show margin, then hide it. So
Yeah.
there's all sorts of crazy things you can do with the parameters. The parameters don't have to necessarily just be associated with the data set. They can be associated with the look and feel of the report and the way it presents itself. And yeah, I've done crazy things in the past as well that would like I've done something in the past that depending on what parameter you selected, change the DAX expression that was submitted. So literally, you could write an expression even in the DAX window here. So like literally for this DAX here, there's still an expression pane, and you could literally write an if statement that said if parameter equals year to date, execute this DAX statement, else execute a different DAX statement. So there's creative ways you could use parameters to sort of affect what your output's going to be. Don't think yeah, other than sort of what you were describing, Reed, in terms of like, a drop down that'll change the dates. I don't
Yeah.
think I've necessarily done it
Yeah.
for
You
that
got
particular
about
use case, but
yeah. You'd have to build out your own like time intelligence table that would do that versus any like built-in ones which are more reserved for just Power BI specifically.
yeah.
One
But yeah,
last one.
definitely possible to answer Mustafa. It's just you'd have to get creative with the way you did it.
Exactly. All right, Rafal had one. Last one I'll put up. Can you turn off page breaks and keep header visible while scrolling? So kind of like how you can freeze cells in Excel.
I don't think so. Not that I'm aware of, because there's no scrolling capability in it. It's pagination as opposed to scrolling. So I guess um, can you? It depends. Classic. It depends. So let's think. There is a way. How did I do this in the past? This is Adam Saxon's favorite answer. If in doubt, put it inside a shape. So this has got disaster written all over it if I try and do this live. Um, it's possible to nest a table inside a shape, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this wrong now. This is absolutely winging it live.
Let me, here we go. Actually, need to flip over to this.
But there was a way that you could. Oh, I'm on the wrong view. Don't want print layout. there's a way that basically you could trick the pagination. So there you go. This is now showing page 1 of 1 because I've nested it inside of a shape, and it renders that shape on one page. Then it turns off the pagination. But although it's turned off the pagination, you're not going to get that freeze pane effect that you would get from a So you've turned off the page breaks, great, but you've not kept the header visible whilst you're scrolling, because I don't think that's don't believe that's something that would be supported. So
right.
Half yes, Raphael, but half no, unfortunately.
No worries. All right, perfect. Let's go ahead and use that. And I think just given the time and everything, let's use this to wrap up for the day. Switch back to us.
Yeah, no worries.
I really appreciate you for coming on to this. I'm very happy with the number of people that have been tuning in. I think we had a peak concurrent of about 35, 38 people tuning in at one point to this. So definitely a nice, healthy amount of people interested in paginated reports. So this has been a really, really great session, and I'm glad to finally have some content to be able to provide to the viewers in the channel to show them the art of possible when it comes to like printed and those types of reports that people want to typically use paginated reports for as part of either premium for dedicated capacity or now with the premium per user.
Yeah, absolutely. And like my Twitter handle's on the screen, so if anyone's got any sort of follow-up questions as well, don't be afraid to reach out. I will try my best. This has still been quite whistle stop. I think for paginated reports, the typical use case is those kind of big table, low-level detail type reports. It does have visualization capabilities, but I think if you're using it in conjunction with Power BI anyway, you're probably better off keeping your visualization in the Power BI report. But yeah, I've kind of only really skimmed the surface in terms of all the stuff it can do as well.
Oh yeah, it's highly customizable, but also has a high learning curve for sure.
Yeah, there's definitely some nuance and definitely some bits that just really aren't intuitive. So whether or not because they're becoming more popular, Microsoft might put some investment into making it a bit simpler, we shall see.
Exactly. But yeah, otherwise, again, thank you for tuning in today, everyone. Thanks for hanging out and for all the good questions and chatter and stuff. I always enjoy just hanging out with you guys. As just a note as well, this will be my last live stream for about 4 weeks because I'll be in Europe for a while for the next conference, and then just spending some time, away from home for a little bit. But I'll still be having weekly videos being released that are recorded. But obviously my wonderful setup that I have is not something that's easily packable in a suitcase. So the live streams will be taking a short hiatus. But otherwise, Johnny, thank you so much for coming on, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
No problem. You have a good day.
Yeah, you as well. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider hitting that like and subscribe button. And if you want to help support this channel, take a look at our channel memberships as well. And last but not least, please consider sharing this video on social media to help pass on this awesome content and to help the channel grow. So until next time.